She was trapped by her evil family for 20 years until a passing billionaire did the unthinkable. For 2 decades, they told the world she was dead, but behind a locked wing of a grand mansion, she was alive, hidden, silenced, and erased by her own family. Then one stormy night, a powerful stranger was forced to seek shelter under their roof, and what he heard behind a wall changed everything. Instead of calling the police, he made a move so shocking it stunned the entire country. Suddenly, cameras were everywhere. The family panicked, and the woman who was never supposed to exist was pushed into the spotlight. But as the truth begins to surface, powerful people fight back, twisting lies, destroying evidence, and trying to bury her all over again. Was his unthinkable choice an act of salvation, or did it put her in even greater danger? And when the truth finally comes out, will justice win, or will evil silence her forever? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The pencil was down to a stub barely longer than her thumbnail. Amelia held it between her fingers, the way a jeweler might hold a diamond, carefully, reverently, aware that this small thing represented something irreplaceable. The graphite had worn to a slant, the wood splintered at the eraser end where she'd used it to pry open a rusted tin of crackers 3 months ago. Or 4. Time moved strangely in the east wing. She stood before the wall, her wall, the one nobody else would ever see. Tally marks covered the plaster in uneven columns, some neat and precise from the early years when she still believed someone would count them, others jagged and desperate from the years when she'd stopped caring about straight lines. 20 groups of 5, 400 individual marks, 20 years. Her hand trembled slightly as she added the final line, completing the set. The scratching sound seemed too loud in the silent room, though she knew it wouldn't carry past the thick walls, past the sealed door, past the family who had forgotten she existed. No, they hadn't forgotten. Forgetting implied accident. They remembered perfectly well. They simply chose to leave her here. Amelia stepped back, studying her work with the critical eye of someone who had nothing else to critique. The new mark was slightly shorter than the others, the pencil having given all it could. She'd have to find something else to write with now. A nail, perhaps. Or her own blood, if it came to that. She dismissed the thought immediately. Melodrama was a luxury. Practicality was survival. The room around her had shrunk over the years, or perhaps she had simply memorized every inch of it so thoroughly that it felt smaller than its physical dimensions. 12 paces from the boarded window to the far wall, 8 paces across. The iron bed frame with its thin mattress that smelled of mildew and time. The single wooden chair with the loose back leg. The stack of newspapers, years old, that she'd read until the words blurred together into meaningless patterns. The chamber pot she emptied twice a week through a crack in the floorboards, listening to the liquid splash into the crawl space below. This was her inheritance. This was what remained of the Whitmore fortune that should have been hers. She returned to the bed and sat carefully, mindful of the springs that had broken under her weight when she was 17. The mattress dipped in familiar places, conforming to the shape her body had impressed upon it over 2 decades. Outside, beyond the boards nailed across her window, she could see thin strips of late afternoon light turning golden, then amber, then the deep orange that meant the sun was setting. Another day survived. Amelia pulled the tin of crackers from beneath the bed. 4 left, which meant she could eat one today if she was careful, and allowed herself to think about what 21 years might look like. Would her pencil stub last that long? Would she? She bit into the cracker slowly, making it last, and listened to the house settling around her. Footsteps in the distant hallways. Doors closing. The family she'd once known, living their lives 3 walls away, eating warm food at a proper table, sleeping in beds with clean sheets, never thinking of the girl they'd declared dead when she was 5 years old, the girl who was supposed to have drowned in the lake, the girl whose funeral they'd attended with appropriate tears, the girl whose trust fund they'd absorbed, whose property they'd claimed, whose existence they'd erased with forged death certificates and sympathetic newspaper clippings. Amelia finished the cracker and brushed the crumbs onto the floor. She would sweep them into the corner later with all the other detritus of her captivity. For now, she lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, at the water stain that looked like a bird in flight, and wondered if 21 years would be the year something changed. Probably not. But as thunder rumbled somewhere beyond her prison and strange lights streaked across the narrow, visible slice of sky, Amelia closed her eyes and allowed herself the smallest, most dangerous luxury of all. Hope. The metal spoon had belonged to her mother. Amelia was almost certain of that, though the certainty was based more on faith than memory. She'd been so young when they'd locked her away, and the details of her mother's face had blurred over the years into something more feeling than image. Warm hands, a soft voice, the scent of lavender. But the spoon she remembered. It had been in the pocket of the coat they'd left her with, the winter coat with the torn lining and the brass buttons. She'd found it months into her imprisonment, when she'd been frantically searching every seam and fold for something, anything, that might help her escape. The spoon had seemed useless, then, a bitter joke. What good was a utensil when there was barely any food? But she'd kept it anyway, and over the years it had become her most valuable possession. Now, at midnight by her internal clock, Amelia knelt by the wall that separated her prison from the rest of the house. She pressed her ear against the plaster first, listening. The house was silent except for the usual creaks and sighs of old wood settling. The family would be asleep. The staff, what little remained, would have retired hours ago. No one would hear her. She'd accepted that years ago. The tapping was ritual more than strategy, a way to mark time, to remind herself she was still human, still capable of trying. Pattern and repetition were all that kept madness at bay. Tap, 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 tap. Pause, tap, 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 tap. She didn't know if it was actual code. She'd seen it in one of the old newspapers, something about prisoners of war communicating through walls. But the article had been torn, and she'd never learned the full system. So she'd invented her own. 3 sets ascending, 3 sets descending. Her heartbeat translated into metal against plaster. I am here. I am alive. Someone hear me. The spoon made a dull sound against the wall, not quite a tap, not quite a thud. After 20 years, there was a slight depression in the plaster where she always struck, a smooth concave bowl worn by repetition. She imagined she could feel it even in the dark. But tonight was different. Tonight there were unfamiliar sounds in the house. She'd heard them since afternoon. Voices she didn't recognize. Movement in parts of the mansion that usually stood empty. The front door opening and closing multiple times. Something had changed the routine, disrupted the careful silence that usually blanketed the Whitmore estate. A visitor, she'd concluded. Someone important enough to warrant activity. Perhaps a buyer for the antiques in the south parlor. Perhaps a lawyer reviewing documents. Perhaps nothing that would matter to her at all. Still, a visitor meant new sounds, new patterns. A visitor meant someone whose ears weren't trained to ignore the impossible. Amelia completed her sequence and paused, waiting. The silence stretched. She raised the spoon again. Tap, 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 tap. Footsteps. She froze, spoon suspended in midair. The footsteps were close, just on the other side of the wall. slow, deliberate steps. Someone walking the hallway that led to the sealed wing. Someone who should not be there at this hour. Her heart hammered against her ribs. In 20 years, no one had walked that hallway at night. The family avoided it entirely, as though her very presence, even unacknowledged, was something to be feared or forgotten. The footsteps stopped. Amelia held her breath, pressing herself against the wall. She could feel her pulse in her throat, taste metal on her tongue. The person was standing directly on the other side. If the wall were thinner, if her prison were less secure, she could reach through and touch them. Seconds passed. A minute. She waited for the footsteps to retreat, for the visitor to conclude they'd imagined the sound, for the house to swallow her signal the way it had swallowed every other cry for help over 2 decades. Then, impossibly, a sound came from the other side. Tap, 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 tap. Amelia's hand went slack. The spoon clattered to the floor, the noise obscenely loud in the suffocating quiet. Someone had answered. Someone had answered. Her hands shook as she scrambled for the spoon, her breath coming in short gasps. This couldn't be happening. This was hallucination, desperation, the final crack in a mind stretched too thin for too long. She pressed both palms flat against the wall, trying to ground herself in something solid. The answering tap came again. Patient, deliberate, waiting. Amelia picked up the spoon with trembling fingers and tapped back. "I am here. I am alive. Please, God, please hear me." The door hadn't been opened in 20 years, and it resisted like something alive. The billionaire, though Amelia wouldn't learn his name until later, put his shoulder against the wood and pushed. The frame groaned. Decades of paint and deliberate neglect had sealed it shut, turned it from passage into wall, from doorway into gravestone. He pushed harder. On the other side, Amelia stood in the center of her room, the spoon still clutched in her hand. She'd retreated from the wall when she heard the first attempt at the door, survival instinct warning her that discovery could mean death as easily as rescue. If it was the family, if they'd finally decided she was too dangerous to keep alive, too risky now that someone else had heard her tapping. The wood splintered. The sound was followed by a shaft of light, painfully bright after 20 years of gloom. Amelia raised her hand to shield her eyes, squinting against the intrusion. The crack widened. More light poured through. Then, with a final protest, the door wrenched open, swinging inward on rusted hinges that screamed. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the hallway light. They stared at each other. Amelia saw him first as shape rather than detail. Tall, broad-shouldered, well-dressed even at 3 in the morning. His breathing was elevated from exertion, his posture alert but not aggressive. He held no weapon. That registered immediately. Whatever he'd come to do, he hadn't come to hurt her. As her eyes adjusted, she saw his face. Middle-aged, with silver threading through dark hair. Strong features softened by shock. He looked at her the way someone might look at a ghost, with disbelief, horror, and something else she couldn't name. "My God," he said quietly. His voice was cultured, educated, careful. "You're real." Amelia couldn't speak. Her throat had closed around words too large to fit through. She took an involuntary step backward, then forced herself to stop. Running was pointless. There was nowhere to run. There had never been anywhere to run. The man didn't enter the room. He stayed in the doorway, seeming to understand that crossing the threshold might break whatever fragile moment this was. "My name is Jonathan Pierce," he said, speaking slowly, as though addressing someone who might not understand English, or someone who might shatter. "I'm a guest of the Whitmore family. I heard someone tapping on the wall. I heard you." Amelia's fingers tightened around the spoon. Her voice when it finally emerged, was rough from disuse. She spoke carefully, her Midwest accent preserved like something pickled, unchanged by time or exposure. "What year is it?" Jonathan Pierce blinked. Of all the questions he might have expected, that clearly wasn't one of them. "It's 2024. He said. "December. What year did you—" He stopped, seeming to realize the implications of the question. His expression shifted into something harder, angrier. "How long have you been in here?" 20 years. The number came out flat. Factual. She'd said it to herself so many times it had lost emotional weight. "They said I drowned. They had a funeral. They took everything." She watched him process this, saw the moment he understood not just the imprisonment, but the erasure, the theft, the calculated cruelty of declaring a child dead while keeping her alive in a sealed room. "The Whitmores did this." His voice had gone quiet again, but there was steel underneath now. "Your family did this to you?" "They're not my family." Amelia's voice cracked slightly. "They were my guardians. After my parents died, they were supposed to—" She trailed off. What were they supposed to do? Love her? Protect her? Basic humanity seemed like too much to have expected, in retrospect. Jonathan took a careful step into the room, moving slowly, hands visible. Amelia noted the details. Expensive watch, well-made shoes, the kind of casual wealth that didn't need to announce itself. This was someone with resources, someone with power, someone who could either save her or make everything infinitely worse. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Do you need medical attention right now?" She almost laughed. 20 years of asking that question too late, but she swallowed the hysteria and shook her head. "I'm alive. That's more than they planned for." He studied her face, and she knew what he was seeing. A woman in her mid-20s who looked both younger and older than her years. Thin but not skeletal. They'd fed her just enough to keep her alive, the minimum necessary to avoid the guilt of murder. Pale from lack of sunlight, hair grown long and uncut, braided to keep it manageable. Clothes that had been replaced sporadically over the years, always old items, nothing that would be missed from the household inventory. A prisoner, a ghost, a living accusation. "What's your name?" Jonathan asked. "Amelia." She paused, then added, "Amelia Whitmore. Though I don't know if I'm allowed to use that name anymore. Legally, I died in 2004. You're very much alive, Amelia Whitmore." He said it like a vow, like a promise. "And we're going to keep you that way." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But 20 years had taught her that hope was the cruelest poison, and trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. You don't know what they'll do if you— because it's right." He said it simply, as though morality were that straightforward, as though doing the right thing didn't come with consequences. "And because I can." Dawn was beginning to break beyond the boarded window, thin strips of grey light seeping through the cracks. Amelia looked at those cracks, at the pitiful evidence that somewhere outside this room, the world had continued turning without her. "I need you to not call the police," she said quietly. "Not yet. They'll make me disappear for real this time, if anyone. I understand." Jonathan's voice was steady, calm, the voice of someone who made difficult decisions for a living. "But Amelia, we need to get you out of here. Today, now. I can protect you, but only if you trust me enough to leave this room." Trust. Such a simple word. Such an impossible request. Amelia looked at the wall where she'd marked 20 years in pencil. At the bed where she'd slept alone for 7,000 nights. at the door that had finally, impossibly, opened. Then she looked at Jonathan Pierce, this stranger who had heard her when no one else would, and made the most terrifying decision of her life. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The Whitmore family took breakfast in the formal dining room, as they had every morning for 40 years. Jonathan Pierce watched them with the polite detachment of a houseguest who had witnessed nothing unusual the night before. He accepted coffee from the silent staff member, added cream with a steady hand, and remarked on the quality of the morning light through the east-facing windows. The east-facing windows that looked out over the sealed wing. Carolyn Whitmore, family matriarch, 73, imperious even in a silk dressing gown, presided over the table with the efficiency of someone conducting a business meeting. Her son Marcus sat to her right, already dressed for the office despite the early hour. His wife Diane picked at her fruit, adding nothing to the conversation. They were a tableau of old money, composed, controlled, completely empty. "I trust you slept well, Mr. Pierce." Caroline's voice was gracious, cultivated, the kind of voice that had been trained to conceal anything resembling genuine emotion. "Quite well, thank you." Jonathan sipped his coffee. "Though I confess I did some exploring. Insomnia, I'm afraid. I hope you don't mind. I found your home's architecture fascinating." A pause. Barely perceptible, but there. Marcus's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Diane's eyes flickered toward her mother-in-law. "How kind of you to take an interest." Carolyn said smoothly, "Though some wings of the house are quite old, I worry about the floors. Safety, you understand." "Of course." Jonathan set down his cup with deliberate care. "The east wing, for instance. I noticed the door to that section appears to be sealed?" The word hung in the air like an accusation. "Structural damage," Marcus said quickly. Too quickly. "From a storm years ago. We've been meaning to renovate, but the cost—" He trailed off, letting money do the work of explanation. Rich people understood putting off repairs. It was plausible. It was also a lie, and they all knew it. Jonathan smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I see. That's unfortunate. I only ask because I thought I heard something unusual from that direction last night. Almost like tapping, or someone trying to signal through the walls." He paused, watching their faces. "Have you experienced any issues with the plumbing? Sometimes old pipes can make the strangest sounds." Silence. Not the comfortable silence of people at ease, but the stretched, brittle silence of people calculating risk. Caroline recovered first. She was, after all, the one who had orchestrated this horror for 20 years. Composure was her armor. "Our plumbing is quite sound, Mr. Pierce, though I appreciate your concern. Perhaps you heard the house settling. These old estates do make the most peculiar noises. I've lived here my entire life and still find myself startled occasionally." "Perhaps." Jonathan didn't push. Not yet. Instead, he pivoted with the grace of someone who had conducted 1,000 delicate negotiations. "I spoke with my pilot this morning. The repairs will take another day, possibly 2. I hope my extended stay isn't an imposition." "Not at all." Carolyn's relief was almost visible. A guest who would leave in 2 days was a guest who could be managed. "You're more than welcome to stay as long as necessary. In fact, there's a wonderful museum in town if you find yourself with time. The Whitmore family has been a patron for generations." Of course they had. Reputation was everything. Public virtue concealing private cruelty. Jonathan finished his breakfast with impeccable manners, complimenting the cook, offering polite observations about the weather and his foundation's work. He played the role of grateful houseguest perfectly, giving no indication that he'd spent the hours before dawn listening to Amelia explain her imprisonment, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper. When the meal concluded, he excused himself with a slight bow. As he left the dining room, he could feel their eyes on his back, assessing, calculating, wondering how much he knew and how much danger he represented. Not enough yet, he thought. But soon, he made his way through the corridors with a visitor's uncertain steps, occasionally pausing as if to admire a painting or examine the architectural details. In reality, he was memorizing sight lines, exits, the locations of the staff. If things went wrong, when things went wrong, because they would, he needed to know this house as well as its prisoners did. The door to the east wing remained ajar where he'd left it. The family hadn't discovered it yet, or perhaps they had, and were waiting to see what he'd do with the knowledge. Jonathan slipped inside and closed the door behind him. Amelia stood by the window, peeling back a corner of the board to peer through the gap. Morning sunlight caught her face, making her squint. She'd told him she couldn't remember the last time she'd seen direct sun. The windows had been boarded over when she was 7. They suspect, she said without turning around. Her voice was stronger now, more present. Sleep, water, and the presence of another human being had begun the process of bringing her back from wherever she'd retreated to survive. You couldn't hide your questions. I wasn't trying to hide them. Jonathan crossed the room, maintaining a respectful distance. I needed to see their reactions, to confirm what you told me. And you were telling the truth, though I never doubted that. He paused. We need to move quickly, Amelia. Today, if possible. Once they realize you've made contact with someone outside this room, they'll act. They've kept this secret for 20 years. They won't risk exposure now. She finally turned to face him. In daylight, even the thin, filtered daylight, she looked younger than she had at 3 in the morning. Vulnerable, but there was steel underneath, forged by survival. What's your plan? Jonathan took a breath. This was the part she wouldn't like, the part that felt like using her, even if the alternative was worse. I'm going to tell them we're engaged. Amelia stared at him. What? I'm going to claim we've been secretly involved for years, that your family, he gestured vaguely at the room, at her, kept you from me because of class differences, racial prejudice, something that will make them look cruel but not criminal. Not yet. That's insane. It's protection. He met her eyes steadily. If I claim you as my fiancé, they can't make you disappear without implicating me. Your disappearance becomes my disappearance, and I'm too public, too scrutinized. They can't risk it. You're asking me to lie. I'm asking you to survive. His voice gentled. Amelia, the truth is too dangerous right now. If we accuse them of imprisonment and fraud, they'll produce doctors who'll say you were institutionalized. They'll claim you're mentally ill, that your memories are delusions. They've had 20 years to prepare for this contingency. We need time to build a case, to find evidence, I have evidence. She crossed to the bed and reached underneath, pulling out a wooden box Jonathan hadn't noticed before. Inside were documents, birth certificate, school records, photographs, her mother's death certificate. They thought I'd forgotten where these were hidden. Or maybe they just didn't care. Dead girls don't need paperwork. Jonathan examined the documents, his legal mind cataloguing their value. Good. This was good. But not enough. This helps, but we still need time, and we need you alive and free while we build the case. He set the papers down carefully. I know it's asking too much. I'm a stranger. You have no reason to trust me, but this is the best play I can see. Amelia was quiet for a long moment. Outside, birds were singing, ordinary birds going about ordinary lives, completely unaware of the extraordinary cruelty humans were capable of inflicting on each other. If we do this, she said finally, if we tell this lie, what happens when the truth comes out? What happens to you? That's not your concern. It is if I'm the reason you're hurt. Jonathan smiled, a real smile this time, sad and genuine. Amelia, they've been hurting you for 20 years. I can handle a little scandal. She studied him. This man who had heard her tapping and refused to walk away. This stranger who was offering to tie his reputation to her survival. Part of her wanted to refuse. She'd survived alone for so long, had learned not to depend on anyone. But another part, the part that was still the 5-year-old girl who'd been terrified in the dark, recognized safety when it was offered. Okay, she whispered. We'll do it your way. Jonathan nodded. I need to make some calls. Prepare my legal team. By this afternoon, this house will be full of cameras. Can you do that? Can you face them? I've been facing darkness for 20 years, Amelia said quietly. I think I can handle lights. The front steps of the Whitmore mansion had never seen this many cameras. Amelia stood behind the heavy oak door, one hand pressed against the wood, feeling the vibration of voices and movement on the other side. Jonathan stood beside her, his presence solid and steadying. You can still change your mind, he said quietly. We can find another way. She shook her head. There was no other way. They both knew it. This was spectacle as strategy, exposure as protection. If she stayed hidden, she remained vulnerable. If she stepped into the light, into his light, borrowed as it was, she became too visible to quietly eliminate. How did they get here so fast? Her voice trembled slightly. I'm a public figure, and I made calls to ensure they'd come. Jonathan's tone was matter-of-fact. When someone like me announces they're making a statement about a personal matter, especially from a location like this, media outlets respond. Some of those reporters have been circling for hours, since I first let it slip to my publicist that I had news. Through the door, Amelia could hear a reporter testing audio levels. Someone laughed. Normal professional sounds. People doing jobs, expecting a normal story about a wealthy man's private life. They had no idea what they were about to hear. The lie is simple, Jonathan reminded her. We met years ago at a charity function. We fell in love. Your family disapproved. They can decide why. We'll let them fill in those blanks. They've kept you here, under their control, using your inheritance as leverage. I've been searching for you. Now I've found you. That's the story. It's still going to destroy your reputation. My reputation will recover. His voice hardened. Theirs won't, that's the point. Someone knocked on the door. Jonathan's head of security. Sir, we're ready when you are. This was it. The threshold between before and after. Between captive and free. Between silence and voice. Between the girl who had been declared dead and the woman who would prove otherwise. Amelia looked down at herself. They'd found her clean clothes, expensive clothes from the house, probably belonging to Diane. They fit poorly. She was too thin, shaped wrong after 20 years of malnutrition and inactivity. But they were clean. That mattered. She'd spent an hour in the bathroom, washing properly for the first time in her life, staring at running water like it was a miracle. It had felt like one. I look terrible, she said without vanity. Just fact. You look like someone who's been hurt. Jonathan met her eyes. That's what they need to see. Not perfection. Truth. He offered his arm. After a moment, Amelia took it. His sleeve was warm beneath her fingers, the fabric soft. Cashmere, probably. She'd read about cashmere in magazines back when she still believed the outside world might welcome her. The door opened. The sound hit her first. Voices overlapping, cameras clicking. The general chaos of 24 reporters trying to occupy the same space. Then the light. Winter sunlight, bright and cold and so overwhelming she had to stop. had to close her eyes against it even as she felt Jonathan's arm steady beneath her grip. "Easy," he murmured. "Take your time." She forced her eyes open, squinted. Gradually, the shapes resolved into people. Men and women with microphones and cameras, all turning toward the door, toward her. Behind them, she could see the circular driveway, the bare trees, the iron gates that marked the boundary of the Whitmore estate. Beyond those gates was the world. She'd forgotten how big it was. Jonathan guided her forward, slowly, giving her time to adjust. The reporters fell silent, sensing this was something more than a typical celebrity announcement. Someone lowered a camera, another turned off a light. They had no idea what they were seeing, but instinct told them to witness it with respect. They reached the top of the steps. Jonathan positioned them both carefully, ensuring she was visible but not alone, protected but not hidden. Then he spoke, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd with the practiced clarity of someone accustomed to being heard. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. I have an announcement of a personal nature, one that I've been waiting a long time to make." He paused, and in that pause, Amelia felt the weight of what came next. The lie that would become her truth, at least for now. "I'd like to introduce you to Amelia Whitmore, my fiancée." The silence that followed was absolute. Then chaos. Voices erupting in questions, cameras firing in rapid succession, reporters surging forward against the security line. Jonathan raised a hand, waiting for them to quiet. "Amelia and I met several years ago," he continued, his voice steady, each word carefully chosen. "We fell in love, but her family—" He gestured behind them, toward the house where the Whitmores were surely watching. "Disapproved of our relationship. They've kept her here, isolated from society, controlled through financial manipulation and emotional abuse, because they believed they could force her to accept a different life, a life they chose for her." Amelia watched the reporters' faces change, skepticism shifting to shock, disbelief melting into horror. Someone in the back was already on their phone, filing a breaking news alert. "For too long, I accepted her family's claim that she needed space, that their control was for her own good. I should have fought harder. I should have come sooner. But I'm here now, and Amelia is free. We wanted to make this announcement publicly because we believe the public has a right to know when wealth and family reputation are used as weapons against the vulnerable." It was brilliant. Amelia thought distantly. The lie contained just enough truth to feel authentic. The suggestion of abuse without specific accusations. The implication of wrongdoing that would force the Whitmores to respond carefully, knowing that anything they said might be used against them later. A reporter shouted a question. "Amelia, how long were you kept in the house?" Jonathan's grip on her arm tightened slightly. They'd prepared for this. She didn't have to answer. But she found herself stepping forward anyway, leaning toward the microphones with a desperation that wasn't entirely strategic. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear, carrying the accent of somewhere far away and long ago. "Too long," she said. "I was kept here too long." The clicking cameras increased. Someone called out another question, but Jonathan was already guiding her back, protecting her from the surge of attention. His security team moved in, professional and efficient, creating space. As they turned toward the waiting car, not back into the house, never back into that house, Amelia caught a glimpse of the window. The second-floor window where Caroline Whitmore stood, perfectly still, watching her inheritance walk away on the arm of a man who could destroy everything they'd built. Their eyes met across the distance. Amelia didn't look away first. The bedroom was too large. Amelia stood in the doorway, unable to make herself cross the threshold. Through the window, a real window, with glass and curtains and a view of manicured gardens, she could see the sun setting over Jonathan Pierce's estate. Orange and pink and gold, colors she'd only seen in thin strips through cracks for 20 years. Is something wrong? The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, she'd said her name was Mrs. Chen, watched her with gentle concern. Would you prefer a different room? Something smaller, perhaps? Smaller. Yes. Small was safe. Small was comprehensible. This room, with its king-sized bed and sitting area and private bathroom, felt like an ocean she could drown in. But she couldn't say that, couldn't explain that space itself had become terrifying, that she'd learned to measure safety in paces and walls and the distance between herself and danger. This room had no such measurements. It simply was. It's perfect. Amelia lied. Thank you. Mrs. Chen smiled, though her eyes suggested she understood more than Amelia was saying. There's a bathroom through that door. Fresh towels, toiletries, whatever you need. And this... She crossed to the nightstand and picked up a small device. Is a call button. If you need anything at any time, day or night, you just press this and someone will come. You're not alone here. Not alone. The words felt foreign. Dinner will be ready in an hour. Mrs. Chen continued. But if you'd prefer to eat here, in your room, that's perfectly fine. No one will judge you. And if you'd rather sleep first or just rest, that's fine too. There are no rules here, Amelia. No expectations. This is your space, and you get to decide how to use it. Your space. Your choice. Your decision. Amelia nodded, not trusting her voice. Mrs. Chen withdrew quietly, closing the door with a soft click that somehow didn't sound like a lock. Because it wasn't a lock. Because she could open that door whenever she wanted. Because she was free. The thought made her lightheaded. She moved into the room carefully, testing each step as if the floor might give way. The carpet was thick beneath her bare feet. The air smelled clean, like lavender and something citrus. Normal smells, home smells, the kind of environment most people took for granted. The bathroom made her cry. She didn't mean to. She'd held herself together through the press conference, through the car ride, through the brief introductions to Jonathan's staff. She'd been strong because strength was survival, and survival was all she knew. But the bathroom? It had a shower, a bathtub, a toilet that flushed, a sink with hot and cold water that ran clear and clean, towels so soft they felt like clouds, soap that smelled like honey, shampoo, conditioner, a mirror. Amelia looked at her reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. Thin face, hollow eyes, hair that hung limp despite being washed that morning, skin that hadn't seen real sunlight in 2 decades, pale as paper. She looked like a ghost. She looked like exactly what she was, someone who had survived, but barely. The tears came silently, efficiently, years of practiced quiet even in grief. She slid down the wall and sat on the bathroom floor, arms wrapped around her knees, and let herself break in a way she'd never allowed herself to break before. Because in the East Wing, breaking was dangerous. Breaking meant giving up, and giving up meant dying. But here, in this absurdly large bathroom in this ridiculously safe house, she could break a little, just a little. She didn't know how long she sat there. Long enough for the sunset to fade, long enough for the automatic lights to flicker on, gentle and warm, long enough for her tears to stop and her breathing to steady. Eventually she stood, splashed cold water on her face, looked at herself again. You're free, she told her reflection, testing the words, seeing if they felt true. They didn't. Not yet. Freedom was too big a concept, too abstract. But safety she could almost believe in, and safety was a start. She returned to the bedroom and approached the bed with the same caution she'd approach a wild animal, The comforter was white, pristine, probably worth more than everything she'd owned in her entire life combined. She touched it carefully, testing the texture. Soft. So soft. After 20 years on a thin mattress with springs that dug into her back, this bed looked like heaven. She sat on the edge. Then, feeling daring, lay down properly. Flat on her back, arms at her sides, staring at the ceiling. The mattress seemed to embrace her, conforming to her body in a way that felt uncomfortably intimate. She could spread her arms and legs and not reach the edges. She could roll over without hitting a wall. The space made her breathless, a soft knock at the door. "Amelia!" Jonathan's voice. "May I come in?" She sat up quickly, tugging her clothes straight. "Yes." He entered, carrying a tray. The smell of food made her stomach clench with immediate, desperate hunger and immediate distrust. Food was rationed. Food was earned. Food was never just given. "I thought you might prefer to eat alone tonight," Jonathan said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "But I wanted to check on you. Make sure you had everything you needed." Amelia stared at the tray. Soup, bread, what looked like chicken, vegetables, a glass of water, a glass of what might be juice, portions that seemed impossibly large. "This is too much food," she said quietly. "You don't have to eat it all." He pulled out the chair, a gentle invitation. "But it's there if you want it. And there's more in the kitchen, always. You won't ever go hungry here, Amelia. That's a promise." She wanted to believe him. But 20 years of rationing, of making 4 crackers last a week, of measuring survival in calculated calories, that didn't just disappear because someone said it was safe now. Still, she sat, because even if she didn't believe it yet, part of her wanted to try. Jonathan moved toward the door, giving her privacy. But she stopped him. "Thank you," she said. Simple words, inadequate words, words that couldn't possibly convey what he'd done by forcing open that door, by lying to protect her, by offering his home as sanctuary. He turned back, and something in his expression softened. "You don't have to thank me for basic human decency, Amelia, but you're welcome anyway." After he left, she ate slowly, carefully, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Waiting for someone to take the food away, to tell her she hadn't earned it, to punish her for wanting more than survival. No one came. She ate until her stomach felt uncomfortably full, then stopped, guilt and joy warring in her chest. Then, because she could, because there were no rules here, she carried the tray to the bathroom and took a shower. The hot water ran for as long as she wanted it to. That night, lying in a bed too large and soft to comprehend, in a room with a door that didn't lock from the outside, Amelia stared at the ceiling and tried to understand what freedom might feel like. She fell asleep before she found an answer. But for the first time in 20 years, she woke in the middle of the night and didn't immediately check the walls for marks, counting the days until nothing. That, she thought, might be progress. The reporter was younger than Amelia expected. Not young like a child, probably early 30s, but young enough that Amelia felt the strange displacement of realizing this woman had lived a full adult life during the years Amelia had been locked away. She'd gone to college, started a career, built a life, while Amelia marked walls with a broken pencil. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me," the reporter said, settling into the chair across from Amelia in Jonathan's study. Her name was Sarah Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen apparently, and she had the careful, respectful demeanor of someone who understood this was more than a story. "I know this must be overwhelming." Amelia nodded. Everything was overwhelming. The camera behind Sarah, recording their conversation. The small microphone clipped to Amelia's collar. The fact that people wanted to hear what she had to say after 20 years of enforced silence. Jonathan stood in the doorway, present but not intrusive. They'd discussed this interview at length: controlled environment, friendly journalist, questions submitted in advance. Nothing about the full truth, not yet, just enough to keep public sympathy, to maintain pressure on the Whitmores, to make her disappearance impossible. "Let's start simple," Sarah said gently. "Can you tell me about yesterday? About stepping outside for the first time?" Simple. Nothing about this was simple, but Amelia understood what Sarah was really asking. Tell them something they can feel, something that makes you human rather than headline. "The light was too bright," Amelia said quietly. "I had to close my eyes at first. I'd forgotten how big the sky was." She paused, choosing words carefully. "When you're kept in a small space for a long time, you adjust. You tell yourself the walls are enough, that the small piece of window you can see is the whole world. But then you step outside and remember that you'd been lying to yourself just to survive." Sarah's expression shifted. Not pity, exactly, but recognition. She was a good journalist. She knew when to push and when to simply listen. "The Whitmore family has issued a statement claiming you were receiving private medical care, that your seclusion was voluntary, for your own well-being." "I'm aware." Amelia had read the statement that morning, each lie carefully constructed to sound like care. They're very good at making cruelty sound like compassion. "But you're saying it wasn't voluntary?" This was the line they'd discussed. The truth without accusation, facts without fury. "I was 5 years old when they locked the door," Amelia said. "I don't think 5-year-olds volunteer for anything. I think adults make choices for them, and children either survive those choices or they don't." "And you survived?" "Yes." The word came out harder than she intended. "I survived." Sarah glanced at her notes. "There's been a lot of speculation about your relationship with Jonathan Pierce. Some outlets are questioning the timing of his involvement, whether this is—" She hesitated, choosing words carefully. "A publicity arrangement." Amelia almost smiled. If only they knew how accurate that speculation was. "Jonathan heard me when no one else would," she said, which was completely true. "He opened a door that had been sealed for 20 years. He gave me a choice when I'd been given none. If people want to question that, they can. But I know what he did for me, and I know what I'd still be facing if he'd walked away." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something more honest, a statement of debt and gratitude and strategic alliance. Sarah seemed to understand the distinction. "What do you want people to know?" Sarah asked. "If there's one thing you could tell everyone watching this, what would it be?" Amelia was quiet for a long moment. This was the question that mattered. This was where she could shape the narrative, could begin to claim her own voice after 2 decades of silence. "I want people to know that cruelty doesn't always look like violence," she said finally. "Sometimes it looks like locked doors and missing paperwork and families who smile at funerals. Sometimes it's quiet and systematic and dressed up as protection." She met Sarah's eyes directly. "And I want people to know that surviving isn't the same as living. But it's a start." The interview aired that evening. Amelia watched it in Jonathan's study, sitting in the same chair, seeing herself on screen like watching a stranger. The woman in the video looked fragile but composed, speaking in a steady voice about unspeakable things. The comments began rolling in almost immediately. "She's so dignified. 20 years, I can't even imagine. The way she talks about survival. God, those Whitmores should rot," but it was the other comments, the ones from older women, that caught Amelia by surprise. "My grandmother was locked away in the 1950s. The family said she was delicate. This brought it all back. She reminds me of my mother. That same quiet strength. That same refusal to scream. Women of her generation were taught to endure. She's from another time, and somehow that makes this even more heartbreaking. Another time. Amelia realized with a strange jolt that to these viewers, she was a historical artifact. Someone whose speech patterns, whose mannerisms, whose way of being in the world was frozen in the early 2000s. She'd missed smartphones and social media and whatever cultural shifts had happened while she was marking walls. She was a ghost from the past, suddenly thrust into a present she didn't understand. "You did well," Jonathan said, entering the study with 2 cups of tea. He set one beside her, the gesture becoming familiar. "The public response is overwhelmingly in your favor." The Whitmores released another statement. Amelia gestured to the laptop screen where a news article was already analyzing the family's response. "They've hired lawyers, real ones." "I expected that." Jonathan settled into the opposite chair. "They're going to fight." "But Amelia, we knew they would. That's why we built the narrative carefully. That's why your interview was so important. It establishes you as credible before they try to tear you down." Credible. Such a clinical word for whether people would believe her pain was real. Amelia sipped the tea. Chamomile. She thought, though she wasn't certain. She'd lost track of what different teas tasted like. What happens when they find out we're not really engaged? When the lie falls apart? Then we tell a different truth. Jonathan's voice was calm, measured, the voice of someone who'd navigated scandals before. "But by then you'll have legal standing, you'll have evidence, you'll have public support. The engagement is scaffolding, Amelia. It's temporary support while we build something more permanent underneath." She wanted to believe him, but temporary things had a way of becoming permanent, and lies had a way of becoming more real than the truth. "I should rest," she said, standing. The exhaustion was sudden and overwhelming, as if the interview had drained whatever reserves she'd been running on. "Tomorrow there's the deposition and—" "Amelia." Jonathan stood as well, his expression gentler. "You don't have to do everything at once. You've spent 20 years surviving. You're allowed to take time to just be. Just be." As if she knew how to do that anymore. As if existence without purpose or strategy or constant vigilance was something she remembered. "Good night, Jonathan," she said quietly. "Good night." Back in her room, she was starting to think of it as her room, which felt both comforting and dangerous. Amelia prepared for bed with the methodical care that had become second nature. She hung up the clothes they'd given her. She washed her face. She checked the door lock 3 times, even though she knew it didn't lock from the outside, knew she wasn't trapped, knew this was different. Habits from captivity died slowly. She was pulling back the covers when she noticed something odd about the coat hanging in the closet. The winter coat they'd found for her, actually, she realized now, it was her winter coat. The one from the East Wing. The one with the torn lining. Someone had folded it carefully, placed it in the closet like it was worth keeping. Amelia pulled it out, running her fingers over the worn fabric. She'd been wearing this coat the day they'd locked her away. 5 years old, confused, terrified, clutching her mother's hand until her mother was gone and she was alone. The lining hung loose near the hem. She'd always meant to fix it, but had never had thread or needle. Now, looking closer, she realized the tear wasn't accidental. It had been cut deliberately, carefully, creating a small pocket between the fabric layers. Her fingers found something stiff inside the lining. She pulled it out carefully, a piece of fabric, embroidered with thread that had faded over 20 years but was still legible. The stitching was her mother's work. Amelia recognized it immediately, remembered watching her mother embroider pillowcases and handkerchiefs, turning cloth into art. The words were from Psalms, verse 27. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" Beneath it, in smaller script, for Amelia, "You are loved, you are not forgotten. Wait for the Lord." Mama Amelia's knees gave out. She sat heavily on the bed, clutching the fabric, reading the words again and again. Her mother had known what the Whitmores would do, or at least suspected, had sewn this message into the coat lining as insurance, as comfort, as proof that someone had cared. 20 years. This message had been with her for 20 years, and she'd never known. She pressed the fabric to her chest and wept, not the silent, controlled tears from the bathroom the night before, but loud, gasping sobs that felt like they were tearing her apart. Grief for her mother. Grief for the little girl who'd needed this message and never found it. Grief for all the years she'd believed herself forgotten when she'd been loved all along. The crying eventually subsided into hiccups, then into exhausted breathing. Amelia lay back on the bed, still clutching the embroidered fabric, and stared at the ceiling. You are not forgotten. Her mother had made sure of that, had stitched love and faith into the lining of a coat because she'd known, somehow she'd known, that Amelia would need it. That proof of love might be the only thing that kept her alive. Amelia fell asleep that way, the fabric pressed against her heart, her mother's words the last thing she read before darkness claimed her. But this darkness was different. This darkness had light on the other side. Liam was 7 years, old and far too perceptive for anyone's comfort. Amelia learned this within the first 30 seconds of meeting him. She'd been in the garden, another marvel, the ability to walk outside without permission, when she heard footsteps on the gravel path. She turned, expecting Jonathan or Mrs. Chen, and found herself face to face with a small boy holding a soccer ball. He studied her with the frank, unself-conscious curiosity of childhood. Dark hair like his father's, serious brown eyes that suggested he spent a lot of time thinking about things most 7-year-olds didn't worry about. "You're Amelia," he said. Not a question, a statement. "I am." She wasn't sure what the protocol was for talking to children. She'd been one once, but that felt like several lifetimes ago. "You must be Liam. Dad said you'd been hurt and needed help." He kicked the soccer ball idly, still watching her. "Did the Whitmores hurt you?" The directness of the question startled her. Adults circled around the truth, with euphemisms and careful language. This child simply asked. "Yes," Amelia said, deciding honesty was less complicated than evasion. "They did." Liam nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Are you scared they'll come back?" "Sometimes. Dad won't let them." He said it with complete certainty, the kind of faith children have in their parents before the world teaches them that adults are fallible. He's good at protecting people. I'm learning that. They stood in silence for a moment, this strange pair, a woman who'd lost 20 years and a boy who'd lost his mother. Amelia realized Jonathan must have told him something, not everything, probably, but enough to prepare him. Enough to explain why there was suddenly a stranger living in their house. "Do you want to play?" Liam asked, gesturing at the soccer ball. The question was so normal, so wonderfully ordinary, that Amelia almost laughed. When was the last time someone had asked her to play anything? "I don't know how," she admitted. "I mean, I knew once, but it's been a very long time." "That's okay, I can teach you." He was already moving, positioning the ball, demonstrating a kick with exaggerated slowness so she could follow. "See? Just hit it with the inside of your foot. Not too hard." Amelia tried. Her coordination was terrible. 20 years of minimal movement had left her awkward and uncertain in her own body. The ball rolled weakly to the side, but Liam just retrieved it and passed it back, patient in the way children sometimes are when they've decided you're worth the effort. They played, if it could be called playing, for maybe 10 minutes. Amelia missed more kicks than she made. Her breathing became labored embarrassingly quickly. But Liam didn't seem to mind. He adjusted his passes to accommodate her limitations, celebrated when she actually made contact with the ball, narrated techniques she'd forgotten or never learned. It felt like therapy, like reclaiming, something she'd lost without knowing its name. Eventually she had to stop, overwhelmed by exertion and emotion. She sat on a nearby bench, and Liam joined her without prompting, leaving the ball forgotten on the grass. "My mum died," he said suddenly, staring at his sneakers. 2 years ago. Cancer." Amelia went still. Jonathan hadn't mentioned this, but it explained things. The sadness in Liam's eyes, the protective way Jonathan spoke about his son, the careful gentleness with which the household operated. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Inadequate words, but true ones. Everyone says that. Liam kicked his feet against the bench. "But you sound like you mean it, like you know what it's like to lose someone." "I do." Her parents, her childhood, 20 years of life. So many kinds of loss she'd stopped counting. "Dad tries really hard." Liam continued, his child's voice carrying adult observations. "He works a lot because he says helping people makes the hurt less, but I think he's just lonely and doesn't want to say it." Amelia looked at this 7-year-old who spoke like someone much older and felt a strange kinship. They'd both been shaped by loss. They'd both learned to read the silences around them, to understand what adults didn't say. "Can I ask you something?" Liam turned to face her fully. "Are you going to stay?" The question hit harder than it should have. "I don't know," Amelia said honestly. "I hope so. But I'm not sure how long your father will want me here." "He wants you here," said with the absolute confidence of a child who'd overheard conversations, who'd seen the way his father's expression shifted when he talked about Amelia's case. "And I want you here too. It's nice having someone else around, someone who's sad like me but trying to be brave anyway." Amelia's throat tightened. "You think I'm brave?" "You got out of that room, didn't you?" Liam shrugged, as if this were obvious. "That's pretty brave." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the afternoon light shift across the garden. Birds sang in the trees. Amelia still marveled at birds, at their freedom of movement, their easy access to sky. A breeze carried the scent of flowers whose names she'd forgotten. "Liam," she said carefully, "thank you for teaching me to play, and for talking to me like—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Like I'm a person, not a story or a problem to solve, just a person." "You are a person," Liam said matter-of-factly. "A sad person who's getting less sad. I can tell." That evening, as the sun set over Jonathan's estate, Amelia found Liam in the same garden. He was lying on his back in the grass, staring up at the sky as it transformed through shades of orange and pink and purple. "Room for one more?" she asked. He scooted over without speaking, making space. Amelia lay down beside him, feeling the cool grass against her back, seeing the sky without obstruction for only the 3rd or 4th time in her adult life. No boards, no bars, no narrow strip of visibility. Just sky, vast and endless and impossibly beautiful. "I do this every night," Liam said quietly. "Watch the sunset. Mom used to do it with me. She said every sunset was different, like the universe was painting just for us." "Your mother was right. Do you miss your mum?" "Every day." Amelia's voice cracked slightly. "But especially now. I wish she could see that I made it out, that I survived. Maybe she can see. Liam pointed at a particularly bright star emerging in the darkening sky. That one's my mum. Dad says it's actually Venus, but I pretend it's her watching over us. Amelia looked at the star that wasn't a star and felt something shift in her chest. This child, who'd lost so much, still found ways to locate beauty and hope in the world. Still believed in watching over, in being seen, in the possibility that love might transcend absence. "That's a good star," she said. "Yeah." Liam was quiet for a moment. "Amelia, when you were locked up, did you ever watch the sky?" "Sometimes, through cracks in the boards, but I couldn't see much." "That must have been really hard." "It was." She swallowed. "But I'm here now. I can see everything now." "Everything's pretty big when you haven't seen it in a while, huh?" "Very big." They lay there until the stars began to multiply, until the sky darkened to deep blue and then to black, studded with points of light. Amelia felt the enormity of space above her, felt the earth solid beneath her, felt the presence of this small boy who'd decided she was worth befriending. "I'm glad you're here," Liam said drowsily. "I think Dad is too, even if he doesn't say it exactly like that." "I'm glad I'm here too." Liam sat up eventually, brushing grass from his clothes. "We should go in. Dad worries if I stay out too late." He offered his hand to help Amelia up, a child's hand, small and trusting and surprisingly strong. As they walked back to the house together, Amelia realized something that felt both terrifying and wonderful. She was starting to feel like she belonged here, not as a guest or a rescued victim or a legal complication, but as a person who had a place in this small, wounded family. It was temporary, she reminded herself. Strategic. Just until the legal case was resolved, just until she could stand on her own, just until... But Liam was chattering about tomorrow. Could they play soccer again? Would she like to see his Lego collection? Did she want to help him make pancakes for breakfast? And Amelia found herself saying yes to all of it, found herself planning for a future that extended beyond survival. That night, lying in her too large bed in her too safe room, Amelia thought about Liam's question. "Are you going to stay?" She still didn't have an answer, but for the first time in 20 years, she wanted one. The courthouse steps were marble and unforgiving beneath Amelia's feet. She stood between Jonathan and Marcus Webb, his lead attorney, feeling the weight of cameras tracking her every movement. 2 days of preparation had brought them to this moment, the preliminary hearing that would determine whether the Whitmore assets could be frozen while investigations proceeded. "Remember," Marcus said quietly, "direct answers only. Don't elaborate. Don't let them see fear." Amelia nodded, though fear was precisely what she felt. Not the familiar fear of the East Wing that had been sharp and immediate, the fear of locked doors and rationed food. This was different. This was the fear of being seen, judged, and potentially disbelieved by a system that should protect her, but might not. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than expected. Fluorescent lights replaced the dramatic chandeliers she'd imagined. Worn carpet muffled footsteps. The Whitmores sat across the aisle with their attorney, Charles Brennan, a man whose expensive suit and dismissive expression announced exactly what he thought of Amelia's accusations. Caroline Whitmore looked imperious in black. Marcus Whitmore fidgeted nervously. Diane stared at her hands. They looked respectable. Wounded, like victims of false accusations rather than perpetrators of decades-long cruelty. The judge entered, a stern woman in her 60s who surveyed the room with the weary authority of someone who'd heard every lie humanity could construct. Court was called to session. Marcus Webb presented their case methodically. Birth certificate proving Amelia existed. death certificate proving her supposed drowning in 2004, newspaper clippings showing the funeral, then school records that stopped abruptly with no transfer documentation, medical records that simply ended. We're requesting a temporary asset freeze, Marcus concluded, while we investigate fraud, false imprisonment, and theft of inheritance. The evidence suggests Amelia Whitmore was declared dead to facilitate illegal appropriation of her trust fund. Brennan objected immediately. Your Honor, this is transparent financial manipulation. My clients have documentation showing Ms. Whitmore received private psychiatric care following a severe mental health crisis. Her current allegations are consistent with documented delusional patterns. Documentation? Marcus interrupted smoothly. Mr. Brennan claims evidence exists but has provided nothing to this court. Meanwhile, we have physical proof Ms. Whitmore was confined to the Whitmore estate for 20 years. The arguments flew back and forth, legal artillery Amelia barely understood. She watched the judge's face, trying to read her thoughts. Sympathy? Skepticism? Professional neutrality? Finally, the judge raised her hand. I'd like to hear from Ms. Whitmore directly. Amelia's heart stopped. This wasn't scheduled. Her testimony was supposed to come later, after more preparation. Ms. Whitmore, approach the witness stand. The walk felt infinite. She was sworn in, hand on Bible, repeating words about truth. Then she sat, exposed under fluorescent lights, with everyone watching. Ms. Whitmore, the judge said, were you confined against your will? Yes, Your Honor. For how long? 20 years, since I was 5 years old. And did you have access to medical care, education, or contact with anyone outside the household? No. Amelia's voice was steady despite the trembling in her hands. I was locked in the East Wing. They pretended I didn't exist. Brennan shot to his feet. Objection. Without medical evaluation, sit down, Mr. Brennan. The judge said coldly. I asked a question. You'll present your evidence when you actually have some. She turned back to Amelia, studying her with penetrating attention. Ms. Whitmore, I'm granting a temporary asset freeze pending full investigation. I'm also ordering independent medical evaluation by a court-appointed physician. She looked at Brennan. If your clients have psychiatric documentation, I expect to see it. Actual documentation, not claims. We reconvene in 2 weeks. The gavel struck. Court adjourned. That evening, Jonathan's legal team celebrated in his study. Wine flowed. Congratulations echoed. They'd won the first battle. The asset freeze meant the Whitmores couldn't hide money or liquidate holdings. But Amelia felt detached from the victory. She sat in the corner with untouched wine, watching the attorneys congratulate each other. This was their professional achievement. For her, it was survival. And survival didn't feel like celebration even when you were winning. You did beautifully, Marcus said, sitting beside her. The judge believed you. That's half the battle. What's the other half? Proving it definitively. He sipped his wine. But I'm confident. The truth is on our side. Across the room, Jonathan caught her eye and excused himself from conversation. He read her discomfort easily. Too much? A little. She set down the wine. I keep thinking about the medical evaluation. What if they find something wrong? What if 20 years left damage they can use against me? Any damage will only support your case, Jonathan said firmly. Scars are evidence, Amelia, not liability. She nodded but couldn't shake the feeling of being dissected, reduced to symptoms instead of a person with a story. I should rest, she said. Jonathan walked her upstairs. At her door, he paused. You're doing remarkably well. I don't feel remarkable. I feel like I'm barely holding together. That's what remarkable looks like sometimes. He smiled gently. Get some rest. Tomorrow we keep fighting. Alone in her room, Amelia prepared for bed. Then she heard raised voices from downstairs, Jonathan and Marcus in the study. "Don't like it," Marcus was saying. "Brennan was too confident today. He should have panicked when the judge ruled against us. Maybe he's just arrogant. Or maybe he has something we don't know about. Defense attorneys who stay calm when losing usually have a trap ready." Amelia closed her door, quietly, heart hammering. She'd known the Whitmores wouldn't surrender easily. But hearing it stated so plainly made the danger real. She climbed into bed but didn't sleep. Instead, she stared at the ceiling and tried to remember everything from the East Wing. Every detail, every date. If they claimed she was mentally ill, she'd need to be devastatingly, undeniably specific. She'd survived 20 years by being observant. Now she'd have to prove it. The news broke at 6 in the morning. Urgent knocking woke Amelia. Mrs. Chen stood at her door, still in her robe. "Jonathan needs you downstairs, now." The living room was crowded. Jonathan, Marcus, 2 other attorneys clustered around a laptop. The television showed Amelia's face with a chyron reading, "Whitmore family produces medical records." "What happened?" Amelia's voice came out small. Marcus turned the laptop toward her. A scanned document filled the screen. Intake form from Meadowbrook Treatment Center. Patient name, Amelia Whitmore. Admission, March 2004. Diagnosis, acute psychotic episode with delusional features. Below were treatment notes, medication records, discharge summary recommending ongoing private care in controlled environment. "That's not real," Amelia said, hands going cold. "I was never in a hospital. I was in the East Wing." "We know it's fabricated," Jonathan said quickly. "But it looks legitimate. Professional letterhead, doctor signatures, detailed notes. They've created an entire medical history." "The media's already running with it," Marcus added grimly. "They're questioning our entire case." Amelia unmuted the television. A news anchor spoke with careful neutrality. "Raises serious questions about the allegations. If these records are authentic, it suggests Amelia Whitmore may have been receiving psychiatric care rather than being imprisoned." The screen cut to Charles Brennan outside the courthouse. "My clients are devastated. They've spent 20 years caring for a deeply troubled young woman. The recent publicity has been traumatic for the entire family." Amelia felt the room spin. They weren't just defending themselves, they were attacking, turning her survival into pathology. "Does Meadowbrook exist?" she asked. "It did. Closed in 2009. Records supposedly destroyed. Very convenient." "So we can't prove I was never there?" "Not easily." Marcus paced. "We can challenge the documents, but that takes weeks. Meanwhile, public opinion is shifting." Jonathan showed her social media on the laptop. Yesterday's supportive comments were now mixed with doubt. If she really was mentally ill, maybe the family was protecting her. Her story did seem far-fetched. "Turn it off," Amelia said quietly. "Please." The laptop closed. She looked at her hands, unable to meet Jonathan's eyes. "You should walk away," she said flatly. "This will destroy your reputation. Say I lied to you. The public will forgive you." "Absolutely not." "Jonathan, no." His voice was steel. "I'm not walking away. They've kept you locked up for 20 years, fabricated death certificates, stole your inheritance. Now they've created fake medical records. If we walk away, they win. And if they win, what message does that send?" "He's right that it would protect you," Marcus said carefully. "I don't care." Jonathan stood. "We're not giving up." Amelia fled to her room, overwhelmed. She lay on the bed, feeling the crushing weight of being disbelieved. A soft knock. Liam slipped inside, clutching his one-eyed bear. "Dad said you were sad," he said, climbing onto the bed. The Whitmores are telling lies, and people are believing them. That's stupid. You're not crazy. You're just sad because bad things happened. That's different. Simple wisdom from a 7-year-old. Amelia turned to look at him. When Mom got sick, people said dumb things too. Liam continued. Dad says people say dumb things when they're scared. Paying attention. Liam's words triggered something in Amelia's memory. Liam, I need to talk to your father, right now. Downstairs, she interrupted the crisis meeting. The newspapers, she said without preamble. I had newspapers in the East Wing, old ones with specific dates. If I was supposedly in a facility from 2004 to 2006, how did I have access to newspapers in the Whitmore mansion? Marcus opened his laptop immediately. What dates? Amelia closed her eyes, reaching into memory. June 14th, 2004. Local paper, summer festival article. October 2004, Halloween edition. January 2005, snowstorm coverage. March 2006, there was an article about Caroline Whitmore donating to the hospital. I tore it up and hid the pieces under the floorboards. March 2006 would have been when you were supposedly still at Meadowbrook. Marcus said excitedly. If we can prove you had that specific article, we need to search that room. Jonathan said, before they clean it out. Emergency motion for evidence collection. I can file today. Do it. And Amelia, write down every date, every detail you remember. Everything that proves you were in that room. She nodded, mind racing. The East Wing was a museum of suffering, but also a museum of evidence. Every mark, every hidden object was proof. We're not done, Jonathan said. Not hope, fact. The truth still has time. Amelia looked at these people who'd become allies in a war she hadn't chosen but couldn't abandon. Not hope, exactly, but determination. She'd survived 20 years. She could survive this. Let's get to work. Amelia stopped leaving her room. It wasn't a conscious decision, more a gradual retreat as the world outside became too loud, too uncertain, too full of people who might not believe her. The medical evaluation had been invasive. Questions about her memory, her perception, her grip on reality. The doctor had been kind but clinical, documenting everything with the detached precision of someone building a case file rather than understanding a person. She'd passed, physically malnourished, evidence of long-term confinement, no signs of psychosis or delusional thinking. But passing felt like another trial rather than vindication. Mrs. Chen brought meals on trays. Amelia ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Liam knocked sometimes, asking if she wanted to play. She said no gently, watching his disappointment through the cracked door. Jonathan checked on her twice daily, never pushing, just letting her know he was there. But mostly she was alone. The irony wasn't lost on her, escaping one prison only to build another. But this prison was hers. She controlled the door, the space, the silence. That mattered somehow. On the third day, she heard Jonathan on the phone in the hallway, voice low and urgent. We need someone who was there, someone who saw her, who can testify. A pause. I don't care how long ago it was, find them. He was still fighting. Even as she retreated, he kept pushing forward. The thought made her feel both grateful and guilty in equal measure. That afternoon, Marcus Webb visited. He sat in the chair by her window without invitation, briefcase on his lap. The emergency motion was granted. He said, We can search the East Wing tomorrow. But Amelia, we need you there. You're the only one who knows where everything is hidden. I can't. You can. He corrected gently. You survived 20 years in that room. You can survive one more visit. What if we find nothing? What if I'm wrong about the newspapers? Then we find something else, but we don't give up. He leaned forward. The Whitmores are counting on you breaking. That's their strategy. overwhelm you until you stop fighting. Don't give them that." After he left, Amelia sat by the window watching the garden. Liam was out there with his soccer ball, practicing alone. He kicked it against the wall repeatedly, methodical and focused. Trying, she realized, to be strong like the adults around him. She'd spent 20 years being strong because she had no choice. Now she had a choice, and she was choosing to hide. What did that make her? Evening came. Jonathan knocked softly. "There's someone here to see you," he said through the door. "She says she knows you, from before." Amelia's breath caught. "Who?" "Her name is Margaret Oakes. She says she was the Whitmore housekeeper until 2006. 20 years ago, someone who'd been there when Amelia was locked away. Someone who might remember." Amelia opened the door. Jonathan stood there with a woman in her 70s, small and weathered, clutching something wrapped in cloth. Her eyes met Amelia's, and tears immediately spilled over. "Oh, child," Margaret whispered. "I thought they'd killed you. I prayed every night they hadn't, but I thought—" She held out the wrapped object with trembling hands. "Your mother made me promise, made me swear I'd keep this safe. She knew what they were planning. She knew." Amelia took the bundle. Heavy, solid. She unwrapped the cloth carefully. A Bible. Old, worn, with a leather cover that had cracked with age. "It's all in there," Margaret said. "Everything your mother wanted you to have. Everything that proves the truth." They gathered in Jonathan's study. Amelia, Jonathan, Marcus, and Margaret Oakes, who sat with the Bible on her lap like something sacred. "I was there the day they locked you away," Margaret began, voice shaking. "You were 5 years old, crying for your mother. Caroline Whitmore told me it was temporary, that you needed discipline. But weeks passed, months. I tried to help, brought you food when I could, extra blankets, but they watched me too closely. Why didn't you go to the police?" Marcus asked, not accusatory, just clarifying. "I tried." Margaret's hands twisted together. "But I was nobody. No education, no proof. Just an old housekeeper making accusations against the wealthiest family in town. They threatened to have me committed if I spoke again. So I—" She stopped, tears flowing. "I stayed quiet, and I've regretted it every day since." Amelia reached out, touching Margaret's arm. "You're here now. That's what matters." Margaret nodded, composing herself. She opened the Bible carefully, handling it like glass. The binding had been altered. Amelia could see where stitching had been added, creating hidden pockets between the leather and the pages. "Your mother came to me 2 weeks before she died," Margaret said. "She knew the Whitmores would take everything. She gave me this Bible and made me promise to keep it safe, to give it to you when the time came. She said if anything happened to her, you'd need proof." She began removing documents from the hidden pockets. First, a will, handwritten, signed, witnessed. Amelia's mother leaving everything to her daughter, explicitly excluding the Whitmores. Then letters. Dozens of them, written in her mother's careful script, dated from when Amelia was born through weeks before her death. Letters documenting the Whitmores' greed, their threats, their plans to contest custody if anything happened to her. The final letter was addressed to Amelia herself. "My darling girl, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But you're not alone. You were never alone. I made sure there would be proof, evidence they couldn't destroy. Trust Margaret. Trust the truth. And remember, you are loved beyond measure, and nothing they do can change that. Wait for the Lord. Be brave. Mama." Amelia's vision blurred. She'd spent 20 years believing herself forgotten, and here was proof she'd been loved all along, that her mother had tried to protect her, even from beyond death. Marcus was already on his phone. "I need forensic analysis immediately. Authentication of handwritten documents, age verification." He covered the receiver. "This changes everything. If these documents are genuine, they're genuine," Margaret said firmly. "I watched her write them. I witnessed the will." Jonathan had the final letter, reading it with an expression Amelia couldn't decipher. When he looked up, his eyes were bright. "We file tomorrow morning," he said. "Emergency hearing. These documents prove premeditation, fraud, conspiracy. The Whitmores knew exactly what they were doing." That night, after Marcus and Margaret left, Amelia sat alone with her mother's letters, reading each one slowly. Stories about Amelia as a baby, hopes for her future, warnings about the Whitmores disguised as casual observations, a mother trying desperately to protect a daughter she wouldn't live to raise. The last letter, the one addressed to her, she read again and again. "You were never alone." Dawn broke slowly. Amelia watched from her window as light crept across the garden. Somewhere in the house, lawyers were preparing documents. Somewhere in town, the Whitmores were probably sleeping, believing themselves safe. But truth had a way of surfacing. Her mother had made sure of that. Amelia dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made her feel strong. Today they'd return to court. Today they'd present the evidence that would destroy the Whitmores' lies. She touched the embroidered fabric from her coat lining, now framed on her nightstand beside her mother's final letter. "I waited," she whispered to the memory of her mother. "Just like you said. And now it's time." The courtroom was packed. Word had spread about new evidence, and journalists filled every available seat. Amelia sat beside Jonathan, her mother's Bible and documents secured in Marcus's briefcase. Across the aisle, the Whitmores looked smaller than before. Caroline's imperious expression had cracked into something closer to fear. Judge Harrison entered. Everyone stood. The formalities felt longer today, weighted with anticipation. "Mr. Webb," the judge said, "I understand you have new evidence to present." Marcus stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Evidence that fundamentally alters this case." He approached the bench with the documents. The will, the letters, affidavits from Margaret Oakes. The judge examined each one carefully, her expression shifting from neutral to grave. "These documents," Marcus continued, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom, "prove that Amelia Whitmore's mother explicitly left her estate to her daughter, excluding the Whitmore family. They also document threats and conspiracy to contest custody, threats made before the mother's death. When combined with Amelia's testimony and physical evidence from the East Wing, they establish premeditated fraud and false imprisonment." Charles Brennan was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, we need time to authenticate—" "Mr. Brennan," the judge interrupted coldly. "I've had these documents examined by a court-appointed forensic expert overnight. They're authentic. The handwriting matches samples from Mrs. Whitmore's estate documents. The paper and ink are consistent with the stated dates. And the witness, Mrs. Oakes, has provided sworn testimony corroborating everything." She looked directly at the Whitmore family. "Furthermore, investigators searched the East Wing yesterday. They found everything Ms. Whitmore described, newspaper fragments from specific dates that contradict your fabricated medical records, marks on the walls, hidden personal items. The evidence is overwhelming." Caroline Whitmore's face had gone ashen. Marcus Whitmore stared at his hands. Diane was openly crying. "In my 30 years on the bench," Judge Harrison continued, her voice hard, "I have never seen such calculated cruelty. You declared a child dead, imprisoned her for 20 years, and stole her inheritance. You fabricated medical records to discredit her. You attempted to use the legal system as another weapon against someone you'd already victimized beyond comprehension." She looked at Amelia, and her expression softened slightly. "Ms. Whitmore, I'm issuing an immediate ruling. All assets stolen from your trust fund will be returned with interest. The Whitmore family will face criminal charges for fraud, false imprisonment, and conspiracy. And you are hereby legally recognized as Amelia Whitmore, alive and free, with all rights restored." The gavel fell. The sound echoed. Amelia sat perfectly still, unable to process what she'd just heard. Free. Legally, officially, undeniably free. Police officers entered the courtroom. Caroline Whitmore stood with rigid dignity as handcuffs were placed on her wrists. Marcus protested weakly before submitting. Diane was escorted out with her face hidden. 20 years of cruelty ending in handcuffs and shame. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Journalists rushing for phones, spectators reacting, lawyers conferring urgently. But Amelia heard it all at a distance. Jonathan's hand was on her shoulder, grounding her, and Marcus was saying something about paperwork and next steps. But all she could think was, it's over. It's really over. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and warm. Amelia stood on the courthouse steps, the same steps where she'd been introduced to the world as Jonathan's fabricated fiancé. And this time, she was just herself. Just Amelia. No lies, no performance, just truth. Cameras flashed, questions were shouted, but Jonathan's security team created space, and Marcus handled the press with practiced efficiency. Amelia tilted her face towards the sun and closed her eyes. Free. The east wing looked smaller than Amelia remembered. She stood in the doorway with 2 investigators and Jonathan, staring at the room that had been her entire world for 20 years. Someone had opened the boarded window, and sunlight poured through, illuminating dust motes and the shabby furniture that looked even more pathetic in full light. "Take your time," one investigator said gently. "We've documented everything, but if there's anything you want before the property is seized..." Amelia stepped inside. Her footsteps echoed differently now. No longer the muffled sounds of captivity, but the clear sounds of someone passing through. The bed where she'd slept 7,000 nights, the chair where she'd rationed food and read ancient newspapers, the corner where she'd hidden things she couldn't bear to lose. The wall. She approached it slowly, running her fingers over the marks she'd carved. 400 lines in groups of 5. 20 years measured in pencil scratches and desperation. Each mark represented a day survived, a day endured, a day closer to either rescue or death. "Do you want us to preserve this?" the investigator asked. "As evidence or..." "No." Amelia's voice was firm. "I want it gone." She found the pencil stub in the corner where she'd dropped it that final night, before Jonathan broke through the door, picked it up, felt its familiar weight. Then she began erasing. The marks didn't disappear completely. 20 years had carved them too deep, but she rubbed at them until they blurred, until they became suggestions rather than statements, until they stopped being a calendar of suffering and became just old damage on an old wall. Jonathan watched from the doorway, not interfering, understanding this was something she needed to do alone. When she finished, Amelia stood back and looked at the room one final time. Without the marks, it was just a room, sad and neglected, but no longer a monument to her imprisonment. "I'm done," she said. They left the door standing open, deliberately, symbolically open. Light from the hallway spilled into the darkness, erasing shadows that had held her captive. Outside, the mansion felt different. News crews were camped beyond the gates, and official vehicles filled the circular driveway. The property would be seized, sold, the proceeds going toward restitution and legal fees. The Whitmore name would be associated with cruelty rather than respectability. Amelia didn't feel victorious exactly. Justice wasn't the same as joy. But she felt something shift inside her, a weight she'd carried for so long finally lifting. As sunset painted the sky orange and gold, Amelia stood by Jonathan's car and looked back at the mansion one final time. The east wing window, her window, was visible from here, no longer boarded, just glass reflecting sky. "Ready?" Jonathan asked quietly. Amelia nodded. She had a foundation to establish, a life to build, a future to claim. She had Liam waiting at home with questions about whether they could practice soccer tomorrow. She had her mother's letters to read and reread. She had freedom, real, legal, permanent freedom. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." They drove away as the sun set, and Amelia didn't look back. The past was documented, processed, sealed in evidence bags and court transcripts. What mattered now was forward. Always forward. 3 months passed like a dream Amelia kept expecting to end. She woke each morning in her room, truly hers now, and spent the first moments confirming this was real. No locked doors, no rationed food. Just sunlight through curtains she could open whenever she wanted. And Liam's piano music drifting from downstairs. The inheritance had been substantial, but Amelia didn't need wealth. She needed purpose. The foundation had been Jonathan's idea. "You could help others," he'd said over breakfast. "People trapped like you were. Familial abuse, financial control, legal erasure. You understand what they face." She'd been uncertain. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are." Liam had interrupted without looking up from his cereal. "You're the strongest person I know." So she'd done it. The Amelia Whitmore Foundation for Familial Justice, hired lawyers specializing in guardianship abuse, created systems for victims to reach out confidentially, rented office space downtown. The work was harder than anticipated. Each case file mirrored her own suffering. Elderly people locked away by greedy relatives, children disappeared into false care, estates stolen through forged documents. But every person they helped felt like retroactive justice for the girl who'd marked walls for 20 years. Her bond with Liam had deepened into chosen family. Not mother and son. She'd never claim that. But family nonetheless. He helped at the foundation sometimes, stuffing envelopes, organizing supplies. "Like Dad helped you," he'd said once. "Like your dad helped me." Amelia had agreed. "And like I'm going to help others." The fabricated engagement had been quietly dissolved. Brief statement to the press, then silence. The media moved on quickly. Some nights, when Liam was asleep, Amelia and Jonathan sat discussing cases, strategies, small victories. Those conversations felt like sanctuary. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked one evening. "Everything that happened because you heard me tapping? Regret saving you? Never." His expression was serious. "But I regret that systems failed you so catastrophically that a stranger breaking down a door was your only option." Now, standing in her foundation's office, looking at the wall of photos, people they'd helped, families reunited, Amelia felt something impossible 3 months ago. She felt like herself. Not a victim, not just a survivor, just Amelia. Margaret Oakes visited weekly with homemade bread and stories about Amelia's mother. Slowly, she was reconstructing a childhood imprisonment had tried to erase. Tomorrow she'd give her first public speech, not as a victim, but as an advocate. The venue was a community center serving veterans and seniors, populations vulnerable to familial abuse. She'd prepared for weeks, but standing in her office now, she realized she didn't need a script. She just needed to tell the truth. Liam appeared in the doorway. "Dad says dinner in 20 minutes, and you need to stop working and play with me first." Did he actually say that? Mostly improvising, but he was thinking it really loud. Amelia smiled, grabbing her jacket. "Same rules. You go easy on me?" "Always," Liam promised. As she followed him out, she passed a mirror. The woman, Looking back still carried shadows in her eyes, but stood straighter now, smiled more easily. She looked free. The community center smelled like coffee and old wood and thousands of stored stories. Amelia stood backstage, watching the audience settle. Elderly men and women mostly, veterans with worn faces, seniors who understood survival as daily choice. Her people, in a way. Jonathan and Liam sat in the back row, as requested. This needed to be her voice, unmediated. She'd spent 20 years silent. She wouldn't hide behind someone else's words now. The introduction was brief. Then she was walking on stage, blinking against lights, seeing faces turn toward her with polite attention. She reached the podium, took a breath, began. My name is Amelia Whitmore, and I was dead for 20 years. The room went still. Not actually dead, but legally dead. Declared dead at 5 so my guardians could steal my inheritance. They held a funeral, published obituaries, then locked me in a room and pretended I'd never existed. She paused, watching faces shift from polite to shocked. I'm telling you this because I'm not alone. There are people here who've been made invisible by families who should have protected them, people who've had their money stolen, identities erased, voices silenced by those claiming to act in their best interests. An elderly woman in the third row was crying, nodding. We tell ourselves families don't do this, but sometimes family is where the worst harm happens, and when abuse comes from inside the home, society looks away. We've built systems that make it easier to ignore than to investigate. Amelia gripped the podium, letting passion fuel her words. The foundation I've built exists to change that, but systems aren't enough. We need people willing to pay attention, to ask uncomfortable questions, to hear the tapping on the wall and choose to listen. Her voice softened but intensified. I spent 20 years believing I didn't matter, that my suffering was invisible, but I was wrong. My mother loved me enough to hide proof in a coat lining. A housekeeper kept a Bible safe for 20 years. A stranger forced open a door when he heard someone calling for help. She looked toward Jonathan and Liam. You matter. Every person here matters. If you're trapped, if someone is controlling you, hurting you, please know it's not your fault. You deserve help. There are people who will believe you and fight for you. She lifted contact cards. Take these. Share them. If you know someone who needs help, give them a card. If you need help yourself, call us. We're listening. You're not invisible anymore. Applause started slowly, then built. People stood. The crying woman clapped hard. A veteran saluted. Afterward, people approached with stories. Daughters who'd stolen pensions, nephews who'd isolated aunts, sons who'd imprisoned mothers. Amelia listened to each one, took notes, gave cards, made promises. Finally, Jonathan and Liam reached her. That was amazing, Liam said, hugging her. You made people cry, but like good crying. You were perfect, Jonathan added, honest and powerful. Thank you, Amelia said simply, for hearing me when I tapped, for not walking away. You always had a voice, Jonathan said. We just helped you remember how to use it. They left as evening painted the sky orange and purple. Behind them, the east wing was being demolished, Amelia's order. She wanted that space transformed into something better, a shelter perhaps, suffering into sanctuary. The past couldn't be undone. 20 years couldn't be returned. But the future was hers to build. Amelia looked up at emerging stars. Somewhere her mother was watching. She'd been hidden. Now she was seen. She'd been silenced. Now she spoke. She'd been erased. Now she was undeniably, irrevocably alive. And that was everything. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.